Imagine stepping outside right now, and the air itself feels like it's trying to cook you. No air conditioning, no cold water bottle, no shade except what you can build with your own hands. Just sun, sand, and a sky that refuses to blink. Now imagine doing that every single day for your entire life, and somehow not just surviving, but building pyramids, running an empire, and inventing some of the most advanced engineering the ancient world had ever seen. That's the part that should stop you for a second. The Egyptians didn't survive the desert by accident. They basically reverse-engineered the heat. You'd think the obvious answer is they just got used to it. And sure, humans adapt. But that answer is way too easy, and it skips the actual genius hiding underneath it. Getting used to heat doesn't stop you from collapsing at noon. It doesn't stop dehydration. It doesn't stop your skin from cracking or your crops from dying. Adaptation alone doesn't build a civilization that lasts 3,000 years. Something far more deliberate was going on. Layer after layer of quiet problem-solving that most people never think about. Let's start with the body itself, because biology was the first line of defense. Human sweat is a surprisingly good cooling system, but only if you're not losing water faster than you can replace it. In a place like the Nile Valley, where daytime temperatures could climb past 40 degrees Celsius, the body's evaporative cooling system was working overtime just to keep someone upright. So the Egyptians built their entire daily rhythm around not fighting the sun head-on. Work happened in the cooler hours, early morning and late afternoon. Midday, when the heat peaked, was for rest, shade, and staying still. This wasn't laziness. It was survival math. Move less when it's hottest, move more when it's not, and let the sun dictate the shape of your day instead of ignoring it. Sleep patterns followed the same logic. Homes were often designed with flat, accessible rooftops, and evidence suggests families used them for sleeping during the hottest stretches of summer, catching whatever breeze existed once the ground had cooled. It's a small detail, but it says a lot. Even rest wasn't left to chance. Every part of daily life was quietly negotiated with the climate. Clothing tells the same story, and it's smarter than people give it credit for. Linen, made from flax grown right along the Nile, became the fabric of choice. Not because it looked elegant, though it did, but because it was light, breathable, and reflected sunlight instead of trapping heat. Loose-fitting robes created airflow between the fabric and the skin, almost like a built-in ventilation system. Compare that to tight, heavy clothing, and you can see why linen wasn't a fashion statement. It was climate engineering, thousands of years before anyone used that phrase. Even the color mattered. Lighter, undyed linen reflected more heat than darker fabrics would have, which is exactly why so much Egyptian clothing in art and archaeology appears pale and simple rather than richly colored for everyday wear. Then there's the eye makeup, and this is where things get interesting, because most people assume kohl was purely cosmetic. It wasn't. Egyptian kohl, made from ground minerals like galena, had a practical job, cutting down glare from the sun bouncing off sand and water, similar to how modern athletes use black paint under their eyes. It may have also had antibacterial properties, helping protect eyes in an environment full of dust, wind, and flies. So next time you see Egyptian art with those dramatic dark-lined eyes, know that it wasn't just style. It was function wrapped in beauty, and that combination, practical necessity dressed up as art, shows up again and again in how Egyptians solved problems. Skincare worked the same way. Oils extracted from plants like moringa and castor weren't just about appearance either. In a climate that could crack and dry out skin within days, these oils created a barrier against moisture loss, something modern dermatology still recommends in dry, hot environments. What looks like ancient luxury was often ancient necessity, just presented with style. Now, here's the part nobody really talks about: architecture. Egyptian buildings weren't just symbols of power. They were heat management systems. Thick mud brick walls, common in Egyptian homes, absorbed heat slowly during the day and released it slowly at night, keeping interiors far more stable than the outside world. Small, high windows limited direct sun exposure while still allowing airflow. Courtyards created shaded pockets of cooler air that could circulate through a home, pulling in breeze while keeping direct sunlight out. Even temple design played with shadow and stone mass to keep sacred spaces cool year-round, with massive columns doing double duty as both structural support and heat buffers. This wasn't guesswork. Generations of builders were quietly solving a thermodynamics problem long before anyone had a word for thermodynamics, passing down what worked through practice rather than theory. And then there's water, the actual foundation of everything. None of this survival strategy works without the Nile. The river wasn't just a water source. It was the entire reason Egyptian civilization could exist in a desert at all. Its annual flooding deposited nutrient-rich silt across the land, creating farmland in the middle of what would otherwise be uninhabitable sand. Egyptians built irrigation channels, basins, and canals to control and direct that floodwater, stretching the growing season and making sure water reached fields far from the riverbank. In a place where rainfall was almost non-existent, this kind of engineered water management wasn't optional. It was the difference between a civilization and a graveyard. Diet adapted too, and in ways that go beyond just eating whatever grew. Foods like dates, onions, garlic, and bread provided energy without demanding too much from the body in extreme heat. Onions and garlic in particular were valued not just for taste but for their believed health properties, showing up in medical texts as remedies for various ailments. Beer, brewed from fermented grain, was actually a safer hydration source than untreated water in many cases, since the brewing process killed off some harmful bacteria. It's strange to think that something we associate with celebration today was, back then, a practical health decision, consumed by workers and children alike as a daily staple rather than an occasional treat. Salt deserves a mention too, and it's an underrated piece of the puzzle. Natron, a naturally occurring salt compound harvested from dry lake beds, is best known for its role in mummification, but Egyptians also understood its drying and preserving properties in everyday contexts, from preserving food to treating wounds. A society constantly losing water and minerals to heat and sweat had every reason to pay close attention to salt, even without understanding electrolytes the way we do now. Here's the layered part. None of these solutions worked alone. Biology handled the short-term survival. Clothing worked with biology to keep the body cool through the day. Skin and eye care protected against the slower, cumulative damage of sun and glare. Architecture extended that protection into the home and workplace. Diet and salt management kept the body fueled and balanced. And water management made long-term settlement possible in the first place. Strip out any one piece, and the whole system falls apart. That's what makes this impressive. It wasn't one clever trick. It was dozens of small, interlocking adaptations working together, refined over generations, until they became second nature, embedded so deeply into daily life that nobody would have called it a strategy at all. It was just how you lived. And this is where the bigger picture comes in. Because it's easy to look at ancient Egypt and think of it as a history topic. Pyramids, pharaohs, museum exhibits behind glass. But strip away the mythology, and what you're actually looking at is a masterclass in problem-solving under pressure. These weren't people with modern science explaining UV rays or thermodynamics or electrolyte balance. They observed, tested, adjusted, and passed down what worked. That's the same process behind almost every human innovation, just compressed into a slower, harder version, without shortcuts, without instant feedback, and without the ability to Google what went wrong. And honestly, some of it never left us. Loose, breathable clothing in hot climates? Still standard advice today. Eye protection from glare? Still a thing, just in sunglasses form now instead of coal. Thick-walled, well-ventilated buildings in hot regions? Modern architects in desert climates still borrow the same core principles, sometimes without even realizing where the idea started. Even resting during peak heat and working in cooler hours is advice you'll still hear in places like the Middle East and North Africa today. So the next time you complain about a hot day and reach for air conditioning or an ice-cold drink, it's worth remembering that thousands of years ago, an entire civilization faced the same sun, the same heat, the same brutal environment, with none of your tools, and not only survived it, but thrived enough to build monuments that still stand today. They didn't beat the desert by being tougher than it. They beat it by being smarter about it, one small adjustment at a time, stacked patiently across generations, until survival turned into something closer to mastery. And maybe that's the real lesson hiding under all that sand. Survival was never really about strength. It was about paying close attention to your environment, and being willing to adjust, again and again, in small, unglamorous ways, until those adjustments became a way of life so complete that an entire civilization could rise out of a place most people would call unlivable.